Today on 10-Minute IT Jams, we are joined by Graham Kittle from Heidrick Struggles. Heidrick Struggles provides senior-level executive search, culture shaping, and leadership consulting services. They bring decades of experience in interacting with a range of world-leading companies to help customers transform their businesses with data-driven offerings. Graham joins us today to tell us a bit more about Heidrick Struggles and their role in the ANZ market. Thank you for coming along and welcome to the Jam.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So to start off, can you give us a kind of elevator pitch about Heidrick Struggles, a little bit of history and what the company does?
Sure. In short, Heidrick Struggles pioneered executive search about 65 years ago. And we were at that point certainly focused really on the top end of town, large corporates globally, and certainly executive search. Now, as the leadership demands and requirements have changed, so we now have expanded to do not only executive search, but we have a very capable consultancy team working on leadership consulting, really advisory around C-suite board requirements, helping to develop those teams, but then also helping to really create future-ready leaders and help build that capability within the organisation. So today, it's really a combination of executive search and consulting. Some of the things that we're consulting on are the very important topics of the day around building diversity and inclusion, supporting leadership assessment and developing the organisation's capability, as I mentioned, and also working with organisations to create the right culture, one that's inclusive, one that's growth-focused and performance-oriented.
And when it comes to your setup in the ANZ region, where are your offices located and do you have many staff on the ground?
We do. So predominantly our offices are in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, but we work nationally. You know, we could be working in Brisbane, we could be working in Auckland and Wellington as we are right now. So we're certainly focused in those large markets, but wherever there are organisations that are really looking for leadership help, and I guess the catch cry is that ultimately our goal is really to help our clients to change the world one leadership at a time. And that doesn't mean we need to be in a national position. We can serve those clients and their requirements wherever they are really across Australia and New Zealand.
And what sort of companies are you dealing with in our region? And what services are they most interested in? Can you name any customers?
To protect our clients' interests, we don't typically name customers, but if you think about the largest and most progressive organisations, whether that be in industrial, the tech that I serve, and I can talk a little bit more about that in technology, and then also across banking, consumer, industrial, healthcare, and also higher education, which, as we all know, has taken a real hit in recent years, but the growth is back in and the energy is back in the higher education segment. And so that's really become an important focus for us for this year as well. And whilst we still do deal with many of Australia's largest organisations, it's not really about the size, it's about the intent. So organisations that have got a passion and a commitment for growth are also those that we work with. So they may be the Australian tech sector. We've seen an enormous amount of investment in Australian technology over the last particularly 2 to 3 years, but certainly it's been growing. And so we might be working with a small up-and-coming Australian technology firm with ambition to grow internationally. And personally, as I said, I'm focused on tech, but also data, business services across the technology sector generally. And in the technology sector, one of the things, not surprisingly, the pandemic has really been an accelerator, has been the digitization of an organisation. So that's both been to, in some cases, speed to market, but also nearly always it's about improving the customer experience. And there's also an important focus on cost reduction through that efficiency, which we can talk about a little bit later if you've got questions in that area. But certainly there's been an emphasis on organisations realising that to be truly effective, they need to digitise, improve customer service, obviously an efficiency play there as well. So the goal really for the work that we do and the leaders that we consult to and place ultimately is really at the C-suite where those leaders are driving change. And importantly, they usually need to report into the CEO to get really access to the board, access and clear line of sight to execute against that agenda of digitisation as well.
And you touched on it a little bit there, but when it comes to the market, what are you seeing in the market at the moment between rising inflation, tighter investment, and low unemployment?
It's really interesting. I mean, the reality is that it hasn't been a frequent occurrence for us to see so much uncertainty. You know, clearly many of us are starting to think, certainly across Australia and New Zealand, it feels like in many cases we're through the pandemic. Clearly and unfortunately and tragically for some, we're just not. But it's not just the focus on that goal as we move through and get to post-pandemic. There's been a tightening of investments, and obviously as a result of some of the supply chain issues, primarily rising inflation globally. So COVID-19 is absolutely still a real issue, but the big focus now for many of the clients that we work with, currently work with, is really attracting and retaining top talent. And it's the talent that can help them to drive through change. If it's not pandemic, it's, you know, obviously the inflationary pressures will put budget constraints on organisations, and so therefore there may well be a drive for greater efficiencies. And always organisations, I think this has been a wonderful thing through digitisation, has been there'll continue to be an increased focus on client and customer. And so it's about capturing growth and identifying those new opportunities for growth. And really it's also, I think, and I was only speaking with someone in our office the other day, and I sort of feel privileged. I've still got a few years of working, quite a few years of working ahead, but it's been great that I've been part of the observation and now also helping to make the change of leaders with more empathy, leaders that are more focused on diversity and inclusion. And importantly, if organizations are looking for top talent, it's that flexibility and the empathy as well, and the ability to work through this post-pandemic as we get there, of hybrid working in office and home. And as a leader, that can be quite challenging. You know, in some ways it was easier for a little while we were having our weekly team meetings across the world, daily stand-up meetings. Everyone was communicating around a crisis. The reality is now with hybrid working, that's becoming more difficult. So it's putting a lot more emphasis on leaders with empathy and leaders that are dynamic, can lead through change.
And obviously you talk about that with the market changes and particularly digitisation. There's a lot that's changing about the way that people are working and about the way that companies are functioning. What considerations are most current for someone entering a C-level role in the IT sector right now when it comes to gender and collaboration and flexible work and that sort of thing?
I think it's continuing the conversation we just started a moment ago on the earlier question that you asked. I mean, this more empathy and more flexible is important, and people being able to adapt. Obviously, we're looking for leaders that can transform, but we're also looking for leaders that can adapt through change, as I mentioned. So I'd say that, first of all, tech in the area I'm personally focused on, whilst I oversee our business across Australia and New Zealand, the tech focus is one I can talk most confidently to, and that's been a boom through the pandemic, no question. It was about efficiency, but it was about the customer. There was obviously fantastic growth for many tech organisations. Now there's another wave coming that we see in addition to the digitisation. Stock prices clearly for many organisations in tech and outside of tech are really declining and have declined. Hopefully that's going to stop soon and we'll see growth again in the future. But the reality is that it does feel like there's a slowdown that's imminent in certainly in the tech sector and in other organisations, as we know. So it really does mean then that companies are going to be changing their requirements continually. It seems to be really something that we're going to live with for quite some time, is change. Obviously it's constant. So leadership and those that can lead in not only boom times, but also lead in the tough times. And I think that would be something, if I were looking to move into a C-suite role and start those sorts of conversations, then I'd certainly be focused on, do I have the agility? If not, how do I create that agility and build those skills to manage through boom and bust?
And if someone wanted to get in touch with Heidrick Struggles, what is the best way to approach you?
Certainly through our website, heidrick.com, and then many of us are quite active on LinkedIn. So obviously there's an opportunity to reach out through LinkedIn as well, but heidrick.com is probably a pretty good place to start.
Well, that's fantastic to get to know a bit more about the company and all the interesting work you're doing. Thank you for joining us today, Graham, on the Jam, and we look forward to hearing more from Heidrick Struggles in the future.
A pleasure, thanks. Good to talk.